Spruce pine, what we got? Well, recording and nobody's saying anything. That works out.
That's why everybody's quiet.
That's right. Don't say anything on the record. Oh my God. No.
That's right.
We'll have Isabel give us the word when everybody's out of the waiting room.
We have people showing up. And there's no waiting room, so everybody can just pop in from here on out.
So let me get going here. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Wondering About Water. This is my way of explaining water to you because I've learned a lot about water and how it works and where it goes and comes from, but there is still so much more to know. So I have brought along experts with me tonight, and they will be able to answer your questions, I'm hoping. So this is a good time if you have any curiosity about anything that's happening, particularly in Southern Colorado. We're all representing some part down here. But we'd really like to hear your questions. And I would also like to hear the answers because I am a lifelong learner and water is my way of learning right now. So today we have some special guests with us. And we're going to be talking kind of about the Colorado River. We're hearing a lot about the compact now. So we're going to be discussing that, I hope, and Southern Colorado issues, the effect of snow on drought, and what can we do as individuals, as communities, as families, government entities, the state, I don't know. But let's see what we can do to figure out how we can conserve this precious resource in Colorado, because we're beyond just climate change now. This is a drought. We have gone beyond just a change of weather can do anything. So that's who we are. So today this is hosted by me and Representative Marc Catlin from House District 58 and Senator Cleave Simpson, who represents District 6, which is about half of Colorado, it seems. So it's a big one. So I'm going to have them get started and introduce themselves and talk a bit, and then we'll get to the rest of our very special guests. Thanks.
Thanks, Rep. McLachlan. I appreciate the invitation. And I think also we would highlight, we'll take questions all throughout, Barb, and use the chat function for folks that are listening and want to offer a question.
Yeah, use the Q&A instead of the chat, and then we can.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, I'm sorry. The Q&A.
No, that's fine. Don't worry.
Again, Senator Cleave Simpson, you can see on the map there if you have the video option, represent Senate District 6. So that's the San Luis Valley and most of Southwest Colorado all the way to the Utah border, north up to Montrose County. So I live in Alamosa in the San Luis Valley. That's where I was born and raised. I'm a fourth generation of my family to farm and ranch in the valley. We have I have about an 800-acre irrigated farm. Rely on diversions out of the Rio Grande River and supplement that with groundwater from confined aquifer wells. So water's a top priority for me and a passion of mine when I'm not at the legislature or on my farm. I also I manage the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. So kind of similar to Steve Wolff, who'll be on a little bit later, and manages the Southwest Water Conservation District. We're unique. There are only 4 water conservation districts in the state of Colorado. So Steve and I cover half of them together. Look, I'll just, brief introduction there. I'm passionate about water and water rights, and the challenges we all face aren't that dissimilar from one basin to another. And I kind of characterize them as a water security issue or challenge where demands have just really exceeded supplies, and really highlighted really across Colorado and the West since about 2002. That was the worst recorded drought in our history in the Rio Grande Basin, and I think it parallels the Colorado River and again much of the West. And it's just been, exponentially harder to deal with water challenges. And a little later on, I should have an opportunity. I'll throw up a slide that kind of puts a graphical representation to that challenge. But right now, just introductions, and I think I'll forward it on over to my good friend, Representative Marc Catlin.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Marc Catlin. I'm from Montrose, Colorado. I represent the 58th district, which is from the top of Monarch Pass to the Utah line. I've got 8 different counties in my district. I've got a part of Montezuma, part of Delta, and then all of Gunnison, all of Montrose, and all of Ouray County, along with Hinsdale. I sat on the Colorado River District Board of Directors. I'm the new vice president for that. So I've been involved with water, pretty much all my life, born and raised on an irrigated farm. The first instructions I ever got about water was my dad telling me, don't let any get off the hill. And I didn't know what that meant. So my brother and I went down and put a canvas dam on the ditch that went over the edge of the hill. So in case anything got away from us, it would stop right there. And that's kind of the way my whole life has been, is don't let it get off the hill. The same is true for the Colorado River, for the Dolores River. I represent the Dolores River and Dolores County. So, I ran the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users I was in management there for 17 years, which is the biggest irrigation district on the Western Slope. We operate the Gunnison Tunnel and 575 miles of canals and laterals, 216 miles of drain ditch. And that's easy for me to remember after being there 17 years. I can remember those numbers pretty easy. The demands on the Colorado River are getting to the point where we really don't know how anybody's going to be able to stand up to some of those demands, particularly from downriver in California, Arizona, and Nevada. We're just now getting to the point, there's a 6-state agreement where we're going to start talking about how we might address some of those shortages. California didn't join that, so they put forward their own idea of what they can do. Hopefully, we're going to see some progress with that, because right now, nobody knows for sure what to do. The state of Colorado, through the Colorado Water Conservation Board, has presented what Colorado thinks we can do. And so those documents have just now started to come together. People are starting to talk about them. There are some ideas about possibly being paid to not farm some of the ground in the Colorado River District in the basin. There are some questions in regards to that, as to, the offering price of $150 an acre foot for consumptive use seems low to me. To be frank with you, that seems awfully low. In my area, a crop will use about 2 to 2.5 acre feet of water per year. So, they're talking about $300 to $450 maybe to not farm. Those kind of things concern me because of the economic activity that irrigated agriculture generates. For every acre of ground, you're probably $300 to $500 of economic activity in your community. So with not having that on Main Street, pretty soon there's going to be some stores that are going to be feeling the difference if farmers are not buying fuels, feeds, supplies, those kind of things. So there's a lot of questions to be answered in regards to what would a following program do. We're in the process of doing that today. So we're trying to answer some of those questions. In the southern part of the state, you're dealing with the same issues. More than likely, the system conservation plan will come to you, and they'll be talking to you in those areas too. The big question now is, did we get enough snow? Well, no, we haven't gotten enough snow. A lot of these river drainages are at 120, 140%, but you don't know what kind of a spring we're going to get in as far as runoff is concerned. So there's still a lot of questions. It's not a drought buster. We've been in a drought for nearly 20 years. So one season is not going to break the drought for Western Colorado. I would hope that some of our reservoirs will heal some, but you know, if everybody continues to divert and all the things that go on with agriculture, I'm not sure how much those reservoirs will heal. We need 5 or 6 years like we're having right now, and in order to heal Blue Mesa and some of those reservoirs, McPhee. So anyway, I'm here for questions. I'll do whatever I can. I don't want to hog up all the time, but thank you for joining, and thanks for the other presenters. Thank you for putting it together, Barbara. I think these are good ideas. Helping people understand and maybe ask the questions they've been wanting to ask is a good place to start. So I'll let you introduce the rest of the speakers.
Okay, thank you. I can't remember who I told to go next. I think it was Steve. Is that correct?
I'm
Wolff?
happy to.
Yeah, please do. Thanks.
And thanks, Representative McLachlan, and good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Wolff, and I'm General Manager of Southwestern Water Conservation District. The district was formed or created by the Colorado General Assembly in 1941, basically to represent all the water users in the San Juan and Dolores River basins. I thought I might follow up on something Representative Catlin sort of mentioned in some Colorado River issues. I've spent a lot of time on interstate matters relative to the ongoings in the Colorado River. He brought up the 2 proposals, and maybe I'll speak to those a bit. There's sort of 2 tracks of negotiations going on between the federal government and the 7 states in the Colorado River right now. One is the renegotiation of the operating guidelines that are going to expire in 2025. But the most immediate concern is, how do we keep the system intact, keep the system whole in the next 3 years? So before those operation guidelines expire. So there's been a lot of effort in that. Sort of what the process that's ongoing right now is called a supplemental EIS. It's a supplement to the existing EIS that operates the system. Department of Interior has started this process. The 2 proposals that Representative Catlin brought forward a few minutes ago, one from California and one from 6 states, are 2 different proposals on what should be contained and evaluated in that EIS. You've seen a lot of media about it lately, and some people have said that if the 7 states couldn't agree, that's a failure. I would strongly disagree. I'm having 6 states, 2 lower basin and all 4 upper basin states come to agreement. I think that was a huge success. It was a big lift. Certainly Colorado, Becky Mitchell at CWCB was a very, very big part of that. I will outline 2 things that I think were very important in the 6 state proposal. First of all, Nevada and Arizona agree that the lower basin should account for evaporation and system losses in the lower basin. It's something they've never done before. And if they do that, that immediately accounts for an extra 1.5 million acre feet that they're essentially overusing right now. So that will bring them much closer in line with what they've been appropriated in the 7.5 million acre feet. That's a huge success. Unfortunately, California has not signed on to that. And I think that for that one reason is probably one of the principal things. The second big thing in the 6 state proposal is it does not commit the upper basin to automatically conserve any volume of water. It recognizes that we suffer shortages due to lack of water that Mother Nature provides almost every year. So it says we will conserve some water as we can, as dependent on the water supply, but does not commit us to any volume of water ever, and any water we all conserve will be a voluntary process. So I think those were 2 big lifts and 2 big wins for upper basin, especially Colorado in that proposal. Department of Interior will be looking at those two proposals, the California one and the 6th state, over the next 6 months. And we'll see what comes out of this EIS process, but that's important. I guess something else that I will just bring up a little bit is for those of you that follow water, several years ago, the Colorado River District and Southwest did a risk analysis study on the west slope of Colorado, trying to outline where the risks, if we suffered interstate administration due to the Colorado River Compact, where those risks fell. That study was completed in 2019, and all of Southwest was one entity within that risk study and identified where our risk based on priority dates pre-1922 and post-1922, who might suffer impacts if there was such an interstate administration. Well, last year in Southwest, we decided we wanted to look at that a little finer and break that down, not just within the Southwest District, but look at all the sub-basins within Southwest, the Animas, the Los Pinos, the Piedra, the Dolores, and so on, and figure out were the risks in Southwest spread evenly across all those subbasins, or do some of those subbasins have higher risks than others? We're just wrapping that study up now. It will help us certainly prepare for any upcoming interstate administration. So those are kind of the big topics on Colorado River stuff. Again, I guess I'll stop and either answer any questions or let Bruce follow up with maybe some more local things.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Representative McLachlan, and thanks to all of our legislators that are on tonight. I know you guys have a very busy schedule, and appreciate you taking the time to meet with all the people here on the webinar and to educate us about things that are going on up at the state capitol as well. And I know that many of you are active. I see you on calls on Monday mornings for the Colorado Water Congress and in regards to water legislation. So thanks again for hosting us. For those online, thank you as well for taking part of your evening and missing part of your dinner to learn more about water. And I guess I would start with, I think we're all looking forward to questions. Sometimes Q&A is where the topics really come up. So I think we're just giving you a little background to start with and then encourage your questions. I'm Bruce Whitehead. I am the contract manager, currently the contract manager for the Animas-La Plata Water Conservancy District. And prior to that, I was about 12 years where I managed both the Animas-La Plata Water Conservancy District and the Southwestern District that Steve is now in. And prior to that, I worked for 25 years with the state of Colorado with the Division of Water Resources, 11 of those over in Senator Simpson's area in the San Luis Valley. And we also had an irrigated parcel south of Alamosa. Currently, we live out near Hesperus and have shares in the HH ditch on the La Plata River, so I just can't get away from these water-short basins. So someday I look forward to being in a water-rich environment and holding senior water rights, but I don't know if I'm going to get there or not. So, and prior to that, I got a degree from Colorado State University in civil engineering, so go Rams. Sorry, Steve, I know you were up in Wyoming for a while. That's quite a rivalry. Still a Ram at heart. So I thought I would follow up a little bit. Steve and I talked, and I have some background on Colorado River issues as well. But I knew that he is covering that, and he's very involved in the Upper Colorado River Commission, and so wanted him to cover all that. But I would just mention a couple things that our district, the Animas-La Plata Water Conservancy District, which I should say takes in the Animas River from just north of Durango to just south of Durango, comes up over the hydrologic divide into the La Plata River, and then takes in almost all of the La Plata River basin as well. But the Colorado River Compact is a concern of everybody's, and I think the concerns are very real. I think people need to be aware of that. I think you're reading more in the newspapers more about that. But I think it's also, we have to say that we are currently not out of compact compliance and have not been. The upper basin has always met its obligations to the lower basin. It operates on a 10-year rolling average. We are above that. Steve and I talked previously, and probably will be for at least the next 3 years. So the average is dropping and has continued to drop because of this 20+ year drought that we've been in. But I think people tend to forget that there isn't any compact administration currently being required because we're not out of compliance. But I think because of the drought conditions, these discussions are really critical that are going on with all the 7 states. I think from our district's perspective, we support the work that has been done by the state of Colorado. I know Lauren Riss is on the phone or on the webinar as well, and the 6-state letter that has gone out. And I think the idea that the lower basin should take the evaporative losses and system losses of 1.5 million acre feet is significant. And it's something that needs to happen. I think one thing I may have a little different opinion on is I think the Colorado and the upper basin needs to be a little cautious of jumping into agreements until we actually make sure that the lower basin is going to do their part. And a big part of that's that 1.5 million acre feet a year. There's lots of discussions about system conservation pilot programs and how you can voluntarily get compensated for, as Representative Catlin said, drying up your acreage. The price that is being quoted for the upper basin is about half what they're paying in the lower basin. And I totally agree with what Representative Catlin said. The secondary impacts to a community are hard to measure. And I think everybody needs to do their part, but I think we need to get agreement with the lower basin on some of these things before jumping in feet first. So that's one thing. And then also, as we move further into this, when I was in Steve's position at Southwestern, we had a thing that shared responsibility or share the burden, that these cuts or these reductions, if and when they will occur in the upper basin, should not be just Western Slope. There is about 50% of the East Slope's water supply comes from the Colorado River Basin, and that there should be reductions there as well. And we shouldn't be targeting West Slope agriculture when we do it. So I think it's just, and I know that the state is well aware of that, and I think they're heading towards that, but there needs to be reductions throughout. So I thought I would just touch on that. That's as far as I'll go really in on the Colorado River. But other things that folks might not be aware of is, and some of you may be, so is there are basin roundtables that was established under state law that meet throughout the state. And we have a Southwest Basins Roundtable that is active here. Their next meeting is April 27th in Durango. And as a part of that, they have updates on the Colorado River that the CWCB provides, Colorado Water Conservation Board provides. And then there's also applications, grant applications from the Water Supply Reserve Fund. And there has been, some of those funds have been replenished, and Lauren may touch on some of that. But I just wanted to encourage people and let them know that there is funding available for projects, for aging infrastructure projects, for stream restoration, all those kinds of things. And now is the time to apply. The state has received additional funds, I think, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill, and they're looking for ways to get those funds out and do good, whether conservation measures throughout the basin. But I would encourage people, if you have ideas or projects that are on what they call the IPP list, the identified projects and processes, to move forward with those. The applications for the Southwest Basin Roundtable are the month before the meeting, so the deadline is March 27th for the next round of funding. And then in addition to that, thanks to Senator Simpson's kind comments during the confirmation hearing and some work being able to use Representative McLachlan as a reference as well, Governor Polis has appointed me to the Colorado Water Resource and Power Development Authority. And I had to go, I thought I was going to have to answer questions before the Senate Ag Committee, and they were nice to me. And both Chris Trees from the Colorado River Basin was reappointed, and I was appointed. But they, on a bigger scale, the Water Resource and Power Development Authority has resolving funds for drinking water supplies and for water pollution control or wastewater treatment. And so we work with municipalities, Denver, Durango, And there are a number of entities on the list. I think Cortez has been on there. And they have low interest loans to upgrade infrastructure and bring them into compliance. They're also looking at lead pipe replacement. I think Denver just got a fairly sizable loan and some loan forgiveness for a lead pipe replacement program, which is important. But because of these other federal laws that have gone into place, a lot of that funding is channeled from the EPA down to the state Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and then administered through the Colorado Water Resource and Power Development Authority. So again, there's a process to go through. You have to be on an eligibility list as a municipality to qualify for these funds, and that needs to be approved by the legislature. And there was a House Joint Resolution that recently was introduced and is going through the process and will be approved. I think it will be approved. So I would encourage people to be aware of that funding that is out there too. There is going to be a bigger push to get this funding out and repair some of this infrastructure. Steve and I talked a little bit about, I'm sorry, was there a question or somebody said? All right. I will jump to legislation and the things that our legislators have been working on. First, I'd like to start with Representative Catlin made a comment at the Colorado Water Congress meeting during the used to be a legislative breakfast, but there wasn't any breakfast there on that day, about, I think his position was do no harm. And I actually appreciate that, Representative Catlin, because I know even when I was with the Division of Water Resources, we watched carefully to make sure that something wasn't occurring in another part of the state that would impact the operations of Water Division 7 here in the southwest part of the state. So, but there have been some bills that are moving forward. The Colorado Water Congress is a group of water interests, a paid membership, and they have a state affairs committee that meets Monday mornings to look at legislation that's been introduced or being proposed. And there have been a couple that have come up this year in regards to forest health and the timber industry. There wasn't a direct connection to water, other than I think we all recognize that forest health is important to the health of our rivers and our watershed. So the Water Congress voted to support those bills, and then they go and actually testify lots of times before the committees that our legislators sit on and voice that support for those bills. So there was a timber industry incentives bill to update some of their infrastructure and to try and create a healthy timber industry again in the state, because to manage these watersheds. And then there was also one for a forest wildfire workforce, where they would create internships working through community colleges. I think both those bills are moving forward. I know that I think all of our representatives and senators that are on the phone tonight are a part of the Interim Water Resource Committee, and they meet, previously they met during the summer primarily and took tours and got educated about water issues. And I think out of that committee, there was a push to extend that to be a year-round committee and actually have a minimum number of times that they could meet. And Senator Simpson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was 4, if I remember right. Is that 4? And that bill also had broad support from the Colorado Water Congress State Affairs Committee and is moving forward. There was one that came up last week that was through the Department of Natural Resources, actually the Division of Water Resources, to update and modernize a well permitting process in closings for real estate, where there is a change of ownership form that is submitted as a part of a closing. And previously, I think you had to do that in person or mail it in, and that's being updated to where it could be done electronically. And I think that is a good thing to do. Previously, but prior to the other change in the law, there was no requirement for that. And having worked for the Division of Water Resources, you'd have someone come in and ask about a well permit, and there's been 3 or 4 new owners since that well permit was first taken out. So I think keeping those current will be a positive thing for everybody. They took a position of support on that bill also. And then I mentioned the House Joint Resolution 1007, which is the Water Resource Power Development Authority eligibility list. I think so far there will likely be some other bills. So we keep hearing rumbling. There could be bills related to the Colorado River. I think that we will have heightened awareness on back to the do no harm or or make sure that there's a shared responsibility in the basin. And the one currently that has generated some discussion that has not been introduced yet is one that is supported by the Department of Natural Resources, and Lauren may touch on this, in regards to stream rehabilitation projects. And there's some great projects out there, and I think everybody acknowledges there's a need for stream rehab. I think there's money available from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act for stream rehabilitation. And the bill is hopefully would encourage more of these projects to take place. The concern, of course, always from the many water interests, if you are a water user or a consumptive use user, is impacts or injury to other water rights. And the bill currently, as it's been drafted, again, it hasn't been introduced yet, and there's been a subcommittee set up through the Water Congress to work with the proponents. But it is very broad, and there aren't many sideboards or restrictions. It mentions things like historical footprint, which is kind of undefined. And in side conversations I've had with people, there are concerns about the impacts to water rights. And in Colorado, the changing of timing of delivery of water can be considered injury or can be injurious to other water rights, and a reduction in an amount can be considered injury. So I think hopefully there was a productive conversation yesterday, but I would encourage our legislators to stay aware of those bills, and I think you will see more and probably some edits. But that is probably the one that has raised or had the most discussion so far, and we're hopeful that we can reach a great point where there can be projects that move forward that won't have adverse impacts on other water rights. Right now, they're kind of considering it as an exemption to the law and being exempt from administration by the state engineer's office. And so we'll see where that one goes. Stay tuned. Representative McLachlan, I may have talked too much already. I could talk some about the ALP project or things we have going on the Plata River, or you could pause for questions and let other people talk, and I could come back and talk about that. Whichever you prefer.
I think we'll go on to the next, and we'll come back, and I think we're going to have lots of time for questions. So we'll plant a question in there for you, so you can go, oh, I know that one. So
thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Teal, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Teal Lehto. I'm sure that some of you are probably wondering what the heck I'm doing up here with all of these very professional individuals. I am a Durango, Colorado local. I was a raft guide for 6 years. I had a raft racing team. And also at that time, I studied at Fort Lewis College, where I focused all of my efforts on water policy. And I founded a club called H2Org, which was dedicated to water resource issues. And we did tons of field trips and different activities. Since graduating, I have started an online platform where I go by the name Western Water Girl, and I discuss water issues that are happening in the West, because I see that there is a gap in understanding amongst a lot of your average individuals of exactly what's happening and how we got here and what is at stake. First off, I just want to say thank you guys for having me here. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you guys and also hear everything you guys are saying. I don't know if you guys saw me when I was taking notes from what you guys were saying earlier. I just wanted to really stress that I think this is a really, really cool event. Water is a really unique space where there's a lot of bipartisan agreement, and I just think it's really awesome to see our representatives come together and discuss these issues for their constituents, and also bring together some experts so we can have some more point of view involved. I also feel like the point of view that I think is often left out of this conversation is really the understanding of how critical climate change is going to impact all of our water resources in the area. A recent study that was released in 2022 said that Colorado could lose 50% of its snowpack by 2080. And in particular, our home mountains, the San Juans, could lose significantly more than that. In fact, they could look a lot more similar to the mountains of Arizona by that time. And I do understand that for the most of us, we won't necessarily personally be dealing with the impact of that, but it is really important for us to understand that the climate of our region is changing rapidly, and we need to act quickly to secure our water resources for the future. And I know all of the other panelists up here are very well aware of that, and they're working diligently to do so. But I do think that it's important for us to acknowledge what's at stake and how quickly we could be seeing some of those catastrophic low water levels in the Colorado River Basin that we're trying to avoid. And because of that, I think we all understand that there is a lot at stake right now. As we've all discussed already, that the Colorado River Basin is on the brink of a system collapse if we don't make significant changes to the way we're using water. And so far from the other panelists, I have definitely heard that there's definitely a lot of movement towards coming to solutions for that. I'm really proud to hear that Colorado was able to take part in the 6 states plan, and I'm really happy that we were able to come to some sort of agreement. And I'm happy to hear that the lower basin, likely if we do follow through with the 6 states plan, will be shouldering the majority of the burden for the deficit that's occurring in the basin, because as probably all of the panelists know here, but maybe not some of our viewers. In 2021, the upper basin actually used 25% less water than the year before. And then in 2022, we sent another over 600,000 acre feet to prop up Lake Powell. So we've essentially donated over 25% of our water to make this happen, and the lower basin has definitely continued to use water at a consistent rate. However, I do think it's really important for every single user within the basin to instill an ethic of conservation towards water use. And again, I don't think that I have to remind any of our panelists on here of that. That's almost everybody here's job, is to make sure that that's happening. But I do think it's really important for us to start with the general public. It's not just your average agricultural user that needs to be educated. Obviously, they also need to know about whatever conservation techniques they can utilize for their farming operation. But I do think it's really important that your average citizen understands how scarce water is in this region and how it is growing to be, it's becoming more and more scarce, and the ways that they personally can make an impact on that. And I personally believe that the best way to do that is through education and communication. And I do think that there are some gaps in the public's understanding of where we get our water resources and how at risk they are. I know I've spoken to Barbara before about a water literacy bill that she's been working on, and I'm definitely excited to hear about that. I think it's really important for us to start really, really young and make sure that like every person in Colorado and in our area understands where water is coming from. And I also think that if we're going to be seeing these like really dire headlines day to day on all of the major news sources, we also need like trusted and steady resources locally to explain what those headlines are going to mean for individuals that live here. And I do think that our Water Information Center does a very good job of that, and I just would like to continue that work. I also think, and this is something that I know other panelists here have already mentioned, but it is very important for us to, as we're moving forward, consider the ways that we can protect rural agricultural communities as water becomes more and more scarce. They may not have the money or political clout to fight water grabs from other entities. And I do think it is imperative that we come up with creative and sustainable solutions for ways to encourage irrigators to use less water while not diminishing the value of their property or their ability to produce their crops. And then I also think another opportunity that our area of Colorado has that's very unique is we have the only 2 indigenous tribes in all of Colorado in our area, and they do have significant amounts of water rights. And I do think that it's really important that they're involved in these conversations and that their needs are represented. I don't often feel that their perspective is represented. For example, I don't necessarily feel like anybody on this panel could necessarily represent their perspective on this crisis that's happening. And I'd love to see more involvement in the future. And then lastly, I just want to close with that. I think although this crisis is really scary for a lot of users and people are panicking about whether or not they're going to be able to continue with their livelihood, I think it could possibly be an opportunity for us to go forward with water management in a more sustainable way. If we all are committed to adapting to our changing climate in a way that is going to be sustainable and last for a really long time. And I think a lot of the other panelists are talking about how we're fairly secure in our area, and that is absolutely very comforting to hear. But I do think that even though we're relatively secure, and as Bruce had mentioned, and we are well within compliance with the compact, it's still important for us to be constantly creating systems that encourage all users to use less water. And I think that is important on a municipal level, it's important for irrigators, and it's also important on an individual level. And some things that I think individuals could do tomorrow or in the spring is choosing to plant less water intensive lawn items. And I know that's like a super basic suggestion, but it really does make a really big difference. In the future, I would really love to see legislation passed in Colorado that bans HOAs from requiring green lawns, because I think that is kind of a useless use of water. But other than that, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate being here, and I really would like to see more community. I love everything we are saying here as panelists, but it's very important for us to break it down into really small bite-sized pieces so the average person can understand what we're talking about, because I feel like it is really scary to read all of these really scary headlines and not necessarily actually understand how that's going to impact them in their day-to-day lives. So thank you so much for putting this together, Barbara. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to answering questions whenever Q&A starts.
Wonderful, thank you. And Lauren, our final welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Representative McLachlan, for having me. I think these are such great opportunities for all of us to share what's going on in our world. I'll first introduce myself, and then I do have just a couple slides to share. I'm Lauren Riss, and I'm the Deputy Director with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We're an agency that's within the State Department of Natural Resources. And we are really the water policy arm of the department. So we lead conversations around water supply and planning and stream restoration efforts and flood mitigation, a whole range of topics. How do we increase storage? We have a robust grant and loan portfolio where we're able to fund projects around the state. What makes us maybe a little bit unique as a government agency is that we're not regulatory. So we don't have the power to tell anyone really that they can't do much of anything. So we really rely on collaboration and working with our partners and government entities around the state of Colorado. I like to say that we're the funders and the cheerleaders, and try and convene people to have the difficult conversations. So the thing that we don't do in addition to regulating is we don't own water projects. We have a lot of technical experts on staff, but we're not a utility. We're not even like the Department of Transportation, where we own and maintain infrastructure of any kind. We try and help our partners out as best we can and help leverage resources to get projects going, but we're not the ones that build projects or run them. We really rely on the local entities to do that. So, okay, I'm going to try and share my screen here. Oh, it says host has disabled participant screen sharing. And if we can't get slides up, that's fine too.
Isabel's there, she's on it.
Go ahead
Okay,
and try again.
Okay, let me try again. Oh, that works.
Yay. I love technology.
Technology. Okay, can you all see my slides?
We can, thanks.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so I wanted to take maybe a slightly different tack on the conversation and talk about, really what Colorado is doing in-house. We've heard a lot about the crisis going on with the Colorado River and the interstate agreements and conversations that are happening. We have really been working over the past several years to update the Colorado Water Plan. And that's the plan that really sets the vision for how we can work collaboratively across the state to build a more resilient future. And we just completed the most recent update of that plan a couple weeks ago, and it was adopted by our board. And we're really proud of the product that came out in the end. Not so much because of the document itself, but because of what it represents. And I think because of all of the actions that are really foundational to this conversation going forward. So as part of this update process, our staff was all around the state. In all 64 counties, we worked with our tribal partners, we worked with local governments, nonprofits, and really tried to incorporate the feedback that we got from the locals so that people could really see themselves in this document. The end product really sets the stage for a decade of collaboration, and there are over 100 actions in this plan that have commitments from agencies across the state of Colorado, and a significant number of actions that we are hoping that our partners will take around the state. The plan is built around 4 values in Colorado. One is a productive economy that supports vibrant, sustainable cities and towns around the state of Colorado, an efficient and effective water infrastructure system, which is so important to a variety of sectors, a strong environment with healthy watersheds, rivers, streams, and wildlife, and then an informed public, which is really what we're doing here, and trying to facilitate forward-thinking solutions that are sustainable and resilient. So that's kind of the goal of this effort. There are 4 action areas: vibrant communities, robust agriculture, thriving watersheds, and resilient planning that reflect those values that we talked about. And these are really the organizing principles of the document. Within each of these categories, there are actions for both the state agencies of Colorado and then also actions for our partners, for people on the ground living and working in the communities. All of these partner actions are really important project level work. As I said, we don't own the projects, we don't run them, implement them, we don't do stream restoration, but we work with partners around the state to do those types of projects. And that's kind of where these partner actions are focused. There's a role for everyone in the state of Colorado to build a forward-looking, resilient future. So 50 partner actions across these 4 action areas. And this is where our grant and loan funding really comes into play. As Bruce highlighted, there are really 2 primary avenues where our partners can come in and apply for grant funding. One is through the basin roundtables. And there's a roundtable in each of the major river basins in Colorado. And they have access to a significant pot of money that just received an infusion of about $20 million over the last year, that came from just record-breaking severance tax receipts that we saw over the past couple of years. And those funds are really geared at improving aging infrastructure and drought resilient projects. So we really encourage folks that have great ideas to go to their basin roundtables and begin that process, as Bruce mentioned. And then we also have a statewide grant program that's called the Water Plan Implementation Grant Program. And that's a statewide competitive grant program that's funded by the sports betting revenue that was passed, legalized in 2019. And we're really grateful to see that funding is really taking off. We have just hired regional grant managers that are living and working in the communities around the state of Colorado. And those folks are on the ground trying to identify proactively projects that can qualify for our grant program, that will really leverage and make the best use of that funding. So as I said, there's 50 partner actions, and then there's 50 agency actions for how the state is committed to moving forward to a more sustainable future. And that, incorporates a whole range of actions that we need to take as a state government. It was mentioned, making wise landscaping decisions. There was a bill that was passed last legislative session that provided the Colorado Water Conservation Board $2 million to set up a turf removal program. And so we have been working over the past couple of months to get that program out the door, and are now receiving applications from qualified entities that will then turn around and offer turf rebate programs to homeowners and other entities around the state of Colorado to replace turf with a more Colorado-friendly landscaping alternative. So we're like really excited to see how that pans out. There are also a whole range of other important actions in the plan that we're committed to taking to moving the conversation forward. One important thing is that this plan is really meant to live online. There's a ton of resources that you can access, links and visuals. It's just really an amazing set of information. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to go to the website there, engagecwcb.org. You know, I think this is really, as compared to the previous water plan that came out in 2015, this is a really accessible document. We really tried to make it friendly to the average reader who is interested in learning more about how they can get involved in what's going on in Colorado. I think that was my last slide on the water plan. I think some of the other presenters tackled the Colorado River discussions very well. I will just note that we have a governor-appointed Colorado River Commissioner who is Becky Mitchell. She's also the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And she's really been spearheading those conversations on behalf of the state of Colorado and has really made it a priority to reflect the feedback that she hears from you all and, you know, from our legislators and the conservation and conservancy districts around the state of Colorado. And I think what you've heard here tonight really does reflect where the state of Colorado stands, that, you know, we have done our part in making the best use of water that we receive through precipitation, snowpack and rain, and, you know, have really taken a significant hit in the amount of water that we're able to put to beneficial use. And, you know, we really feel strongly that it's time for the lower basin to step up. And so we feel really encouraged by the progress that has been made. There's a long road ahead, but we have great partners and great support around the state of Colorado in our General Assembly and our water users around the state. So I think that we're encouraged and hopeful that, you know, we really will come to some agreements that benefit the water users in Colorado. I think I'll leave it there and just open it up to conversation or any questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I have to tell you, you know, you said you're the cheerleaders. And the last time I saw Becky Mitchell, she was like queen of the cheerleaders.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're not doing their job, the lower base. I mean, she was very excited about it. And we couldn't help but get excited just watching her cheer. So
she's passionate.
Yeah, she is, but that's exactly what Colorado needs. So we're all really, really happy with what you have done with all of you have done for all of us here. So we will do, if the people who are listening would like to start asking questions, you can do it in the Q&A and we can start answering there. I do have a few that I can get started with. So we'll go from there, and whoever wants to take it, please do. And I want everybody to read the Colorado Water Plan. You have that abbreviated issue. I picked that up at the party. You guys had the.
We do. There. The executive summary is also at that link.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, that's a great synopsis of what's in the bigger document.
Yes, it is. It's not an easy one, but and keep gambling if that's how you want to how you want to support the water plan. It's working. So
hey, Rep McLachlan, can I, before you throw out a question,
absolutely,
can I do a couple things? Let me see if I can share screen.
Okay.
Rep Catlin referenced, you know, the drought isn't over, and so I wanted to highlight with folks, I think you should now be able to see what routinely is highlighted as the kind of the snowpack condition, the snow water equivalent across all of the basins in the state. And that's as of today. It's certainly better to be, you know, at close to 100% at the 1st of February than below. But this can change really rapidly particularly as you get into March and April, for sure. If you don't continue to get snow in March and April, those numbers will fall dramatically. But I did want to highlight with for folks. When you look at this map, it's really important. I don't know if my cursor will show on the screen, but over on the left side, current snow water equivalent, that's a percentage of of a 30-year reference point that changes every decade. So it's not based on long time historical average snowpack. So like these references to median at the Rio Grande at 95 and the San Miguel Dolores at 130 are based on what those averages were from 1991 to 2020. A couple of years ago, that was based on 1980 through 2010, which the 80s were a historically very wet period for all of the basins in the state. So it's really important to recognize when you see we're above average. Again, it's great to be above average now, but it's also a reflection of only the last 30 years, which are really drier than the prior 30-year period. And this can fall, off the scale pretty rapidly. And because we've been so dry for 20 years now, that 130%, and if we went into the 1st of June into May at 130% of normal in the San Miguel Dolores, it won't equate to 130% normal of average runoff. The Rio Grande was, because it's near and dear to my heart, last year, at 100% of snowpack produced like 70% of average runoff. So because soil conditions are so dry. So lots of things to think about and weigh in. When I see this map routinely on television a lot. Here's where we are for snowpack, and we're way above average. And to Representative Catlin's point, we're not out of the woods. The drought isn't over. And I see Teal has her hand up.
Yeah, Teal, go ahead. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the most terrifying things about climate change in this region is that generally evapotranspiration rates for plants and soils rise exponentially as temperatures rise linearly. So as the area gets warmer as a result of climate change, we'll actually see the amount of water that is removed from the system by dry soils and plants rise. And that's something that we definitely need to be considering as we're adapting to a changing climate.
Thank you. Bruce.
Thank you, and great comments by both Teal and Senator Simpson. I did want to follow up since the snowpack is up there, also to mention that those are all mostly high elevation measurements that take place. And in southwestern Colorado, in particular the Durango, Hesperus area, we have a lot of low elevation snowpack this year that we haven't had probably since at least 2019. We had some on the ground, but it's one of the better years for low elevation snow that we've seen in quite some time. We also had a wet fall. I think Teal touched on things. The wet fall that we had brought the soil moisture up to better than what it was the previous year. And so we're hoping those things combine that we do get closer to an above average runoff. But all good points, but it does look a little better. But if it doesn't snow for the rest of the year, that's going to drop the average down. This is just the numbers that Senator Simpson put up there are the averages for today as this historic date. And so that could change. I don't think we're to our peak yet, but it's at least somewhat optimistic. It looks better than it has for a number of years. And I think we'll see more runoff off of the lower elevation this year, at least in our part of the state, than what we've seen in a while.
Thank you. We're hearing about a lot of different strategies, investing in conservation and watershed protection for demand management, things like that. But what are the most effective measures, do you think, that have been implemented to date? And what can we learn from them? Representative Catlin.
Thank you. Well, in my area, one of the best things that we've done is that we have updated the delivery systems in the Uncompahgre Valley. In other words, we've piped and lined canals. We piped the ditches, we lined the canals so that we don't lose the seepage. In areas like ours, we could lose up to 30% of the water that's diverted from the river down through those canals and laterals. There's been a good program there in regards from the salinity control program. We have piped, I think, about 127 miles of canals and laterals there in the Uncompahgre, particularly in the Mancos Shale. And it has saved an awful lot of water, but it's also firmed up our supply so that water not used in those ditches can be used out on the west side of the project that takes actually more water than what the Mancos Shale does. I think for the state of Colorado, that could be the low-hanging fruit to push more on updating delivery systems, because a lot of the farms that are around have spent money through NRCS and through private investment to pick up their delivery systems at the head gate of their ditch. So on-farm improvements have been going on all along. We're trying to use less water, but the delivery systems continue to lose water to the system. And if we could capture some of that water, I think the state of Colorado will see some quick returns, at a lot quicker than some of the other projects that we're talking about. So I'd like to see the state of Colorado be a lot more involved in the conservation of water in delivery systems.
Interesting. Any other comments on that? Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we see in terms of water conservation that's really effective is when water utilities implement tiered rate structures and water budgeting measures. So where they essentially charge more for greater use of water. So they would set a threshold based on the average use of water in an area. And then if you exceed that water budget, they might call it, then you pay more for water. And so that has provided a really strong incentive, especially, when we get to outdoor irrigation season and everyone is watering their dreaded bluegrass, they really get hit in the pocket. And so that provides a really strong incentive for folks to, turn it down a little bit.
I guess, Lauren, what's the difference between, domestic gardening water, home use, and agriculture? Is there percentage wise of water use?
Yeah, I mean, the statistic that we cite in the water plan is that in the state of Colorado, agriculture uses about 90% of the overall water. And then municipal is, roughly about the rest. There's a small portion that goes to industrial use in there as well. But, I think as a state, we really have to consider the highest value of our water and just make sure that our use reflects that value. So the agricultural water use is also fairly complicated, as Representative Catlin can attest to. There are a lot of other water users and benefits that come from return flows. That is when water is diverted and put to use by an agricultural operation. Some of that water is consumed by crops and the rest of it goes back into the system. And so it's a more complicated, complicated system to evaluate, I would say. So, certainly locally grown food and the economy that's built around agriculture in the state of Colorado is super important.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with Representative Catlin and speak to maybe something that's being looked into is alternative crops. Crops that use less water but can still provide a viable economic product for a grower to produce. Some of that work's being done here in Colorado, but certainly throughout the Colorado River Basin, there's ongoing research relative to that.
Thank you. And I know, Senator, you've talked about this before in Water Committee. What are you thinking about that? You're on mute.
Now I'm not.
Yeah, thanks.
Only 3 years of Zoom and I still
know.
haven't figured out how to use it. So I actually was going to pull up a graph, but I can't seem to find it right now. I was just going to highlight, a lot of attention and focus around the Colorado River system, which is where most of the folks on this panel and call are associated with. But the Rio Grande Basin is part of my district and where I live. And it's like, I routinely characterize it as it's a bit of a training ground about a lot of what the Colorado River is experiencing now. We've been doing this and focused in this space for a decade or more. When you talk about compact administration on the Colorado River system, the Rio Grande has been under compact administration curtailment really since 1969. I have very senior water users. I have people with water rights from 1852 to 1860 that during the irrigation season at times are curtailed. And that means the division engineer's office and commissioners like Bruce used to have to do is you tell those folks, you don't get to divert your 1860 water right today because we need it to meet compact obligations. So again, the kind of some of the discussions about what's unfolding in the Colorado River Basin, the Rio Grande, it sets an example where, again, for a decade now, and we don't have a reservoir like Lake Powell and Lake Mead, but we do have pretty prolific underground storages, aquifer systems that are very, very manageable. They respond really well to less pumping, and in some instances where we actually divert and recharge to create a kind of a bit of a man-made aquifer system. And I've seen comparisons. It's been really, I guess it's not surprising, but there's a wonderful correlation between the change in water levels in Lake Powell and the change in our unconfined aquifer system in the valley. And they're just parallel. It's amazing to look at it graphically and go, I guess it's not a big surprise because they're both just fed by snowpack. But we've been struggling and challenged in this space and actually are statutorily required to create and maintain a sustainable aquifer system in the valley. So that's like coming to the Colorado River system and putting a mandate on, you will recover and create and maintain a sustainable Lake Powell. That's kind of the magnitude of what we're experiencing. And so for the better part of 10 years, we've been assessing ourselves fees, raising money to advance efforts to fill our version of Lake Powell, our aquifer system, where we're being more efficient with water use, a lot less flood irrigation and more center pivot sprinklers. And those pivot sprinklers routinely, again, try to find ways to become more efficient with water and trying to grow less consumptive use crops. I'm the fourth generation of my family and I raise alfalfa, the most water consumptive crop we could raise, but it's all my capital investment. It's what my dad did, what my grandpa did, what my great grandpa did. To try to change and move out of that is a challenge, but I'd like to highlight this year, my son's managing the farm while I'm gone. We raised 50 acres of hemp this year. We didn't raise it for the CBD oil that a lot of producers were chasing because it had big dollars associated with it. We raised it just for the fiber in the product. So I know I raised it on half the water as my alfalfa crop, but the economics haven't proven. I have it under contract. There's a processor in the valley in Monte Vista that's contracted to buy it and process it for the fiber. He hasn't taken a single bale of hay yet, but my son saw him today at the ag conference in Monte Vista today and said, yeah, we're kind of got to go to Denver and I'll be back next week and we'll be out there to pick up your hemp and start processing it. So I don't know where the economics are going to work out, but ultimately for us to fill our version of Lake Powell, we'll be more efficient, some different crops, but ultimately there will be less irrigated acres in the San Luis Valley. And we're well down that path now of we've raised money to fallow temporarily in some instances, long-term in other instances, and outright purchases of farms to suspend those groundwater withdrawals to again create our version of Lake Powell is our aquifer system and trying to recover it. And it's a challenge. And again, 10 years of this, we were making really good progress. On the heels of 2002 was the worst recorded drought in our history, and the aquifer depleted immensely, and we were on this pace. We started this kind of effort in 2012 to recover the aquifer, and we're building, our aquifer levels are increasing, and then 2018 hits. It's the fourth worst drought in our recorded history. We basically lost all ground. We're idling, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 acres right now on an annual basis. We've cut our pumping our dependence on that aquifer by a third. We went from pumping 300,000 acre feet of water to 200. And because the conditions have just been so challenging, our aquifer is at its lowest point since we ever started measuring it. And that was in January of 1976. And that puts my community and my producers in a really challenging spot because we're on the cusp of the state engineer stepping in. And much like some of the conversations about compact curtailment, you know, we're in the position where the state engineer is going to potentially put in a spot that he's going to turn 3,000 wells off that irrigate 160,000 acres in the valley. So I don't want to go on and dominate the whole conversation, but there's some of the challenges and things like what we're doing and what me and my son are trying to do to create a different outcome.
Yeah, Representative Catlin told, I don't know when that, Representative Catlin told me once that he looks out at his acreage and that's his retirement account. That's not something you can just lose because you need to change crops. I mean, this is your living. So yeah, I hear you on that one. So Lauren, did you have another question?
Oh, no, is my hand still up? I don't mean for it to be up.
It's okay. They're so cute. It's hard to not put them down.
Well, yeah, I know. It's only been 3 years.
Year 4, we figure out the hands. Year 3, we're still at zooming in silence. Bruce.
Thank you, Representative McLachlan. And I just wanted to, 2 comments. One, I didn't want Cleave to think that they have the only compact that's being administered in the state of Colorado. And in fact, on the Plata River, the La Plata River Compact was signed in 1922, almost at the same time that the Colorado River Compact was signed. Of course, with any compact sometimes comes litigation. There was, 8 to 10 years of litigation, but it's been administered probably at least since the 1930s. And it's a daily compact from February 15th through December 1st, where half of the flow at the upper index gauge, similar to Rio Grande del Norte, has to be moved to the state line or be available to New Mexico at the state line the following day. So it's a very challenging compact, and compacts are difficult, and we have to comply with those. They're basically treated as the #1 water right in the system. But with all due respect, I know the Rio Grande Compact has its challenges as well, and they've done a lot of great things, especially with the groundwater management in the valley. But didn't want them to get away with just thinking they're the only ones. We've learned lessons here every year. And that led me also to, I think what I had heard Representative Catlin say before, that is a good reminder in the upper basin. We have already been taking shortages in the Colorado River system just based on the hydrology. The water isn't available. Our consumptive uses, which is what the Colorado River Compact is based on, in the upper basin has actually declined over the last few years, while the lower basins consumptive uses have increased. And for those that haven't seen it, CWCB put together some, I think they called it infographics. Is that correct, Lauren?
Yeah.
That showed this use and the drop in the upper basin. So we're already taking shortages just because we can't regulate those flows with reservoirs in the same way that the lower basin can. But Representative McLachlan, going back to one of your questions, and it led to something Teal had touched on about outdoor uses and HOAs and those kind of things. I have to go back a number of years and give Senator Ellen Roberts some credit, and have to give her a plug because she gave it a good try to come up with a state law that would have had limitations on what outside use would be for new development for housing, and would have been a proportional amount of the lot size, and would only affected new development. It wouldn't affected any lawns or gardens that were in place. But it was looking at the way our state is growing that there needed to be some restriction. But again, it wasn't a prohibition. It was just a reduction in the size. And Southwest District at the time and others down here supported that. And it would have applied statewide. But it was the local control issue that basically killed the bill. And some of the bigger municipalities in Colorado that said, we don't want the state to tell us what to do on our water conservation. We're doing a great job. And a lot of them are. We're doing a great job. We'll come up with our own plans. But it is now, we've gotten a number of years later, 10 years, as Lauren mentioned, we have turf replacement funding that's out there. Turf buyback is, and Las Vegas has shown that that's been very successful. And I was encouraged to see what Aurora has done. Aurora has a limited water portfolio. They're growing quickly, and they are actually limiting outside use on new development. And Mayor Kaufman at a conference said, no more golf courses. We're not going to build golf courses, and we're going to have a reduction on each lot on the size of lawn. It'll be primarily in the backyard. And it sounded an awful lot like what Senator Roberts had proposed a number of years ago. So whether there's a place in state law for that, questionable just because of the local control, but I hope that more municipalities follow that, and there could be a reduction. And the reason that's important is because of your house use. Most if you inside your house, 90% of that returns back to the system through a septic system or through a water treatment plant. But your outside use is your biggest consumption, your lawn and gardens, and agriculture, of course, has an evapotranspiration amount too. But the biggest use for in houses is the outside use. It's probably 90% of consumptive use. And so I'm hoping that folks will move forward. It needs to start sometimes at the local levels and in your own homes. And it all helps somewhat, but this is a bigger issue. We're talking about huge volumes of water, but that is something that's encouraging to see that some of these entities are moving towards that now. Thank you.
I agree. Nevada has banned all lawns on every home for all new homes now. You cannot have a lawn, and you have to have a certain size of a swimming pool, no matter how many lots you have. So they seemed like draconian measures just, a few years ago. And now if you don't do it, you're not doing the right thing. So, and that turf replacement bill, I will add before I call on Teal, was Representative Catlin's bill. So thank you. Teal.
I
And
just
mine-
wanted to
And
pop-
mine.
Yeah, senators.
Well, that's right. He was in the
Oh, good
Senate.
job.
I don't care.
Oh.
And
I just wanted to pop on and say I love everything that Nevada's doing. They basically banned non-functional turf grass, so it's not only for private homes, but it's also for municipalities and commercial businesses, and they have to be able to prove that the grass is. I think I went there and I did a tour with them, and I think it was something around like it has to be at least 1,000 square feet. It can't be over a certain grade slope. And they're just eliminating a lot of these like random patches of grass that are right on the side of the road. And I think that's a really, really good place to start. They do a really good job recycling almost all of the water that's used indoors there too, which I think is something that all municipalities in this area should start thinking about. And I do want to say that a bunch of cities, including Aurora and Denver, signed a memorandum of understanding with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, saying that they were willing to adopt some of the same practices that they're using in Vegas already, which is really cool. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that the legislation that I would like to see isn't necessarily requiring people to not have lawns or requiring people to remove grass, but just giving people the option, if they live in an HOA, to not be fined for choosing to not have a lawn. I have had several people reach out to me who live in nicer neighborhoods in Denver, and they say they would like to xeriscape, but they have to pay a fee to their HOA if they're not going to have a lawn. And that just seems kind of silly to me. But yeah.
Yeah, out at Three Springs, it's beautiful out there, and they don't require it, and you don't miss the lawn out there. It's really quite a nice little HOA there.
I was gonna say, Rep. McLachlan, Teal, I've heard that, I think there's some legislation kind of contemplating that. I've heard that around the Capitol just in the last week. So I do think that's unfolding, but I was gonna suggest there's some good questions in the Q&A that are really specific to Colorado Compact that either something Steve, Bruce, or Lauren would have much more expertise, or Marc serving on the River District Board, but there are a couple of really good questions in there.
Okay, I will start with that. Let's see, is everything being done to restrict future Trans Mountain diversion?
Well, one of the things about Trans Mountain diversions is in the Colorado Water Plan, they have to meet all kinds of restrictions in order to even present the idea that there would be more. One of the things we're dealing with right now is that if we're going to have to end up sending water down the river, then we being the Western Slope, want Eastern Colorado to cut back their use too, because all of that use that's Trans Mountain diverted is consumptive use. On our farms here in Western Colorado, the consumptive use is about half of what we divert. So as was mentioned earlier by Lauren, I believe, is that our use and reuse of water down these river bottoms is phenomenal. We use water 5 to 7 times in the Uncompahgre Valley. So my tailwater becomes your headwater, which is your water right. So that's how we go down these rivers using it. And when we say that we use, agriculture owns 85% of the water, or whatever it ends up being. But when we say that, the insinuation is we've used it all. But the point is that if we had used it all, there would be none at the state line. So we got to keep track of the fact that we use the water and it comes back into the system. It's reused again and again. So we don't consume 90% of the water that's in the river. And that's something we're going to have to make sure that we disclose and explain to people that are not in the agricultural business, because that's a big statement when you say, well, they own 90% of the water, that's why we're short. That's not the reason we're short. It's Mother Nature didn't deliver enough. In the Uncompahgre Valley, we've been on rations, in other words, restrictions, 17 out of the last 20 years. So we're doing our part, and ag is doing its part. If you take a look at the investments in the San Luis Valley and down in the Cortez district, those improvements and the way those guys are irrigating shows that they're using a lot less water. And we're going to have to address that. But when we start to systemize irrigation, what are we going to do about return flows? So those are some questions we're going to have to answer.
Thank you, Catlin. Steve.
So I was going to follow up a little bit on the Trans Mountain diversions and maybe poke Senator Simpson just a bit. I think we realize the big Trans Mountain diversions come out of the Upper Colorado, go to Denver and the Front Range. But there are about half a dozen Trans Mountain diversions that come out of the Upper San Juan, go to the Rio Grande Basin. They've been there a long time. They operate mostly for ag water and augmentation water. But we continue to see some of those entities to expand some of those water rights up there and take additional water out of the Upper San Juan. And as the Colorado River Basin dries up, we'd like to see some less and less of that happen. Now, certainly the biggest of all the diversions in the Upper San Juan takes water to the San Juan Chama project from Colorado to New Mexico to feed the Rio Grande in New Mexico is by far the biggest of those. So we have ours as well.
Thank you. Teal.
I just wanted to add that there are definitely people who try to keep bringing back those zombie Trans Mountain proposals, like the Renewable Water Resources proposal over in the San Luis Valley that was recently kind of shut down, but it might come back in the future, which was basically going to take I think around 20,000 acre feet of water from groundwater and pump it over to Douglas County. And that was pretty much entirely opposed by everybody in the region. Like the Alamosa Citizen did a poll in their newspaper, and 91% of respondents said that they were opposed to that project. And an additional 8% said they didn't know enough about it to have an opinion, and only 1% said they supported it. So I do think that those proposals come around, but there is a lot of bipartisan agreement that might not be the best to continue building them, especially if we're utilizing it to support urban sprawl when it would be taking water away from rural agricultural communities. I just wanted to point out that I think there's really strong public opinion opposition to creating new diversions like that.
Thank you. Bruce.
Thank you, Representative McLachlan, and good point by Steve in regards to Trans Mountain diversions. We don't like to poke our state senator too much, but they are smaller diversions. I've been to a number of them. They actually help with augmentation plans in the San Luis Valley because it's new water imported into the basin, but it is a Colorado River supply. And most of those were developed in about the time the Rio Grande Compact was signed in 1938, so around 37 or before that. But they could be subject to curtailment if we actually got into a compact situation. So it's also in their best interest to make sure that we're in compliance with the Colorado River Compact. And then jumping into that, Steve touched on the San Juan Chama project, and I see that Richard Ballantyne had two questions that I might take a shot at answering, and Steve may want to jump in.
Please.
In regards to the voluntary reduction in use, which was the SCPP, System Conservation Pilot Program. His question was that quantified? And Richard, that program was a voluntary reduction, but there wasn't really a good way to shepherd that out of the state. I don't know that there's been an actual quantification. If it did indeed make it out of the state, and stuff lower in the basin likely did, but within the state, that could have been picked up by another water user and put to use within the state. But if it made it down and went through the system, it became system water. So it didn't necessarily just benefit the upper basin and or Lake Powell. A portion of that water actually benefits the lower basin too, which is one of the concerns when the lower basin isn't suffering or having to pay evaporation or account for evaporation system losses. And we have these voluntary programs in place that's actually benefiting the lower basin. We need to think about those things. And then his second part of the question was in regards to Albuquerque and New Mexico, how do they get their water? That is the San Juan Chama project. And that project diverts water from tributaries to San Juan, the Navajo River and the Rio Blanco through a tunnel that comes out at Chama, New Mexico, and can divert a significant amount of water. On an average, I think it's probably between 90 and 100,000 acre foot a year. But that agreement was in place as a part of the Colorado River system. That is how New Mexico gets a lot of its compact allocation, is through the San Juan Chama project. So good point, it was a good question, but that is actually their entitlement through a federal project that was put to use in the 1970s.
Thank you. Senator's on the phone. Steve.
So I just wanted to follow up on Richard's question because Bruce talked about the SCPP program. I think Richard's question was really focused on the 6-state letter that went out a couple weeks ago. And to answer him, there was no quantification of upper basin conservation in that proposal. Basically, it was said we would try to do what we can, but we committed no specific quantities of water.
Oh yeah, he's back, Senator Simpson.
Oh yeah, just a couple of thoughts. Let me see, where was I going to go with this? Rep. Catlin kind of touched on it. Within the framework of the water plan is something called the conceptual framework around how discussions about transbasin diversions were supposed to unfold, or maybe it was Bruce that was talking about it, but we've actually crafted how those conversations are supposed to happen. Fortunately, that hasn't had to take place. And then I got to be like, I wear a lot of hats. So wearing my Rio Grande Water Conservation District hat, the district is actively working to acquire one of those transbasin diversions that's already existing that Steve was referring to, out of the San Juan River, and then it comes into the Rio Grande Basin, and it was bought years ago and constructed. We're trying to acquire it to use for mitigation water in some of our efforts, augmentation water. But then if I put either my senator hat on or really my personal hat, the San Juan Chama project is a classic example of the whole system is over manipulated. Somebody had referenced to me one time, the San Juan Chama project in particular, is like taking water out of a dry basin and moving it over to an even drier basin. So the Rio Grande is a recipient outside of Colorado of that San Juan Chama project water, and it does push, you know, close to 100,000 acre feet a year when there's enough water in the system, but it just takes it out of the Colorado River system and puts it in the Rio Grande system. And me personally, and as a senator, I'm like, I would like to figure out, you know, how do you, again, the system is so over manipulated. how could you ever turn the clock back, which would be what I want to do. There's also uniquely, Bruce would know this, there's a diversion out of the Division 3, out of the Rio Grande Basin into the Arkansas. It's on Mackinac Pass back behind the sand dune. So again, all across the state, we've done these things and people were, resourceful at the turn of the century, trying to figure out how to take advantage of gravity and where water was and where it wasn't. So, but ultimately, I don't want to overstate it, or for me personally, I'm trying to figure out if you could turn the clock back and reduce some of the manipulation that we've created in the system, I would feel better.
Yeah, I think everybody would. So, we need Ellen Roberts, 20 years ago to do what she was thinking of doing, I guess. Steve.
Just to add on a little bit, and Senator, I appreciate that. I think we all agree with what you said. What's a little ironic right now is the Bureau of Land Management is trying to expand an existing transmassive diversion out of San Juan into the Rio Grande. Here we have a Department of Interior agency trying to take water out of the basin, while other entities in the Department of Interior are trying to reduce Colorado River uses. So it's kind of hard to match those two things up. So just an example of where we struggle a bit.
Yeah, it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Exactly.
We supposed to.
That's part of our problem.
Okay, here's the last question for us. Because it's getting late, everybody has bedtime and maybe you want to eat tonight. I don't know. Could the panelists share their perspectives on the advantages and disadvantages of renegotiating the compacts that have been mentioned thus far? The Colorado River, Rio Grande, and La Plata.
Well, I'll take the Colorado.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me do the Rio Grande, because it'll be
Please.
easy. There's 3 states, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. And the thought of going to the table and trying to renegotiate, ultimately you're talking about taking water from one state to make it available to another one. That there's just no appetite to do that. I can't envision a scenario where the Rio Grande compact is renegotiated. I'll put a plug in just real quick, and Steve knows this. The federal government, that there was legislation introduced last year in Congress in Washington to create a federal oversight committee over the Rio Grande and to develop and implement an integrated water resource management plan for the Rio Grande from its headwaters in Colorado to its terminus in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's just unacceptable for the state of Colorado to go, you want the federal government to control the Rio Grande from headwaters to terminus. Colorado will lose in that scenario. So my district and me as a state senator, very firm that the compact was constructed well. It did what it was intended to do, distribute as equitably as they could, the usable water in the Rio Grande. We all have learned to live within those guidelines and parameters for we're not as old as the Colorado River is. It was in 39, so we're 80 years into this, but I can't see a scenario where the Rio Grande compact would be renegotiated.
And I'll follow up on the Colorado. If you can't renegotiate the Rio Grande compact with 3 states, you're never going to get the California or the Colorado River compact with 7 states. And I don't think you should try. I think the compact has the ability to function as intended. And we have found over the years that there's enough flexibility in that compact to allow the 7 states and the federal government to do what they think is best on the system and still operate under the terms of the compact. So I think look for that flexibility. Don't try and do that big political lift.
And I'll throw out one thing that applies to all interstate compacts, but in particular, when you're talking about 7 states, all interstate compacts have to be ratified by Congress. And we know how smoothly Congress runs. So I wouldn't want to place any bets if it got to that.
Okay, fair enough. Teal.
I agree. I think it's really unlikely that we would ever see any of these compacts rewritten. I think if anything, what we would see is like litigation between states that would change minute features of those compacts through that litigation, which we might end up seeing if we can't get California on board. But I'm sure other panelists on this panel have more expertise in that area. But what I really wanted to mention is that in the Colorado River Basin, about 30% of the rights actually belong to Indigenous tribes. But a lot of the Indigenous tribes do not actually have the infrastructure or the legal adjudication to utilize those rights. And I do think that if they were to renegotiate the Colorado River Compact, those tribes would play a really critical role, and that water would have to come from somewhere. So I think that's a concern that isn't necessarily at the forefront of everybody's mind when they talk about renegotiating compacts, but it would definitely be an important part.
Bruce?
Thank you. And I would agree. I think reopening the compacts is a mistake. I think as Steve mentioned, there's enough flexibility, especially on the Colorado River Compact, for the states to reach agreement on how it's operated and how we're going to address these shortages. There's much less water than what had been modeled when the compacts were negotiated. Not to mention that California has a lot more representatives in the House than Colorado does. So it would be a very heavy lift. And in regards to the Plata River Compact, we hear that in Colorado that it's not fair, and we hear it in New Mexico it's not fair, which means there was probably somewhat of an equitable apportionment that Senator Simpson referred to. So I think there's guidelines and the interim operating guidelines on the Colorado River that are being renegotiated now. That's how you resolve some of those issues that are out there. And then also I did want to touch on, because Teal has mentioned the tribe a few times, and should. They definitely hold a lot of rights, reserved water rights in the Colorado River system. But I think it's also important to note that in Colorado, those reserved rights claims have been settled. There was a settlement in 1988. There was a consent decree that went through Colorado Water Court in 1991, which some of those water rights date back to 1868, the date of the reservation. But key to some of those settlements were some of the bigger projects, Bureau projects that were built here, including McPhee Reservoir and the Dolores project that the Ute Mountain tribe has an allocation in, and then the Animas-La project that both the Ute Mountain tribe and the Southern Ute Indian tribe have allocations. In those projects, they took a project reserved rights, but they basically subordinated to the date of the decree, the Colorado decree for those projects. So we'll see how that plays out. But those reserved rights in Colorado have been settled. But in the Animas-La project itself, because of the lack of infrastructure and because the project was scaled down and irrigation was removed, there was a real lack of infrastructure for those tribes to be able to utilize their water within Colorado. There was a provision in the settlement that those uses were supposed to occur on the reservations or within the Animas-La Water Conservancy District. So as we have these conversations about Lake Nighthorse and water in there, it's not always as simple as what people think. You just release water and we shore up these supplies downstream. There's decades of negotiation that took place to settle the tribal claims and also to protect the other existing uses, the non-tribal uses within Southwest Colorado.
Thank you. Thank you both. Representative Catlin.
Thank you. On the Colorado Compact, that's a treaty between those states. Compacts are approved by the Senate as a treaty between these states. It's been working for over 100 years now. One of the problems is those of us in the upper basin have been living within our water budget. Southern California does not live under their water budget. That's one of the big problems. They continue to think that some of the water that's up here in Colorado should belong to them. Opening the compact or even attempting to would be a simple loss to the state of Colorado. There's still 1 million acre feet that we haven't developed. They're using that 1 million acre feet down there, and they don't want to ever think they could lose that. And we don't want to give it up either. The compact has worked. The prior appropriation works better in times of shortage than it does in times of long. And that's not my theory. That came from Supreme Court Justice Hobbs. Told me that one day. And it really does make sense because it's worked this far. We've been through some terrible droughts in the history of the compact. 54, 1977. There have been some droughts. So it has worked, and it will continue to work as long as the people that are members of that compact recognize their responsibilities, just like the state of Colorado has recognized its. So I would really worry about anybody thinking they could pop open the compact on the Colorado River, because all of the things that we're doing in the state of Colorado are to make us compliant, and we've been compliant. The idea that maybe under this supplemental EIS, we're going to reduce deliveries out of Powell to 5 million acre feet. There's some risk in that for the state of Colorado. Because if that were to push us quicker to a call or to curtailment, we ought to really think about that. I appreciate the fact that we want to build some cushion in there, but everybody on the river is going to have to agree that 5 million acre feet delivery is something that will be compact compliant, because it'll move us 3 to 5 years quicker to being in curtailment. So, the compact has worked. I'm a fan of it. The idea that we deliver 7.5 million acre feet is a requirement. Yes. The problem we've had is that we've been delivering 9 million and more in times of short. And we didn't get credit for that because, we don't get credit. But Southern California likes having that bathtub ring around Lake Mead, because it's the best poster child they've got for saying we're short of water. But remember, if they call the Bureau of Reclamation and say they want 5 million acre feet delivered, they get it. We don't have that benefit up here. So they've kind of created their own problem down there, and they're looking at us to help them when they haven't decided what they want to do to help themselves. So one of the reasons is system conservation. And in the letter, we should not be bidding against ourselves as to how much we can send until they say how much they can save. It's one of those deals. If you're going to play your whole card, don't play it too early. And I think that's one of the things the state of Colorado did, was they didn't say how much we would save, because they haven't said what they'll save down there. So, it's one of those deals. Wait and see. I guess it's chicken and the egg. The compact is a protector for the state of Colorado, and I believe that, and I'll stand with that. Thank you.
Teal.
I just wanted to reiterate, I absolutely am not a fan of cracking open the can of worms of reworking the compact, but I do want to point out that there are some significant flaws in the compact. I mean, it assumes that there's going to be 16.5 million acre feet in the system every year, and we've been seeing a consistent around 12.4 million acre feet for the last 20 years. So I do think it's really important for all entities within the basin to recognize our new environmental reality in this region, and the reality that we're probably going to continue seeing flows that are closer to that average than the average we utilize to create the compact. But again, I'm not saying we should crack open the whole compact. I'm just saying we do have to recognize there were some inherent flaws in how we decided to divide water in the basin.
Marc, I could see you.
One of the things about that 12.4 million acre feet delivery, if Southern California lived with their 4.4 million acre feet, we'd be in a lot better shape. They have not lived under that. And that's one of the problems we've got, is that the water we're sending meets our requirements. They outdo their requirement. They use more than 7.5 million acre feet that we deliver on an annual basis, which is more than what they should be. So when they start talking about the compact and it doesn't work because Mother Nature didn't give us enough moisture, that's right. But they continue to use more out of that reservoir. Now, I'm not sure if that picture behind you is that reservoir or not, but that's the best poster child they've got. So, they have got to start living within their budget, because we are, and so are the other states. So that's something that's got to be said more often than it is.
To be clear, I absolutely support that. I think that the lower basin absolutely should be shouldering the majority of the burden in this crisis. I just wanted to be really straightforward that there are some inherent flaws in the amount of water that we've allocated throughout the basin.
Bruce? Last
Thank
one.
you. I don't know if I want to have the last word.
You may have to.
I would just and this is very simple math and nothing is ever that simple, but when we start talking about inherent flaws, 1.5 million acre feet of system loss a year over a 20-year drought period is 30 million acre feet. That's more than the capacity of either Lake Powell or Lake Mead. That's how much difference that would have made in our current conditions if that would have been accounted for by the federal government over the last 20 years. We would be in a much different situation right now. So that's why now is the time to make sure that we get those system losses addressed and bring the lower basin, I think, into compliance.
Does anybody want to save Bruce from having the last word? Come on. Okay. I don't know where you're pointing because you're pointing off the screen on my screen.
Marc Catlin has his hand up.
No, I
No.
forgot to take it down.
Oh.
And the teacher saw that it was up, so.
I did, yeah. Pick me,
Thank
pick
you for
me.
having me.
Well, I just want to thank you all very, very much for joining me tonight and to join all of us tonight. I think this starts a lot of conversations and we may have to do a round 2 at some point. So those people still listening in, I don't know how many of you have gone home now or turn it off. Let me know if you'd like some more because this is not a simple subject, but it's a completely vital subject to what we are doing in Colorado right now. And it's everything is water. So, so thank you very, very much. This will be on YouTube under, let's see, Wondering About Water. So we will post it up and let everybody have that so you can post it. And I don't know if you can delete out parts that you don't like, but you have to kind of go with it. So, but thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you
Bye.
so much.